Welcome back to Dave's podcast. I recently posted up a story on my website on the Dave Hopwood blog, which was called Killing Spree. In the Bible, there are many rich people, and there isn't one sort of attitude towards wealth and money and property and all that. There are a whole variety of stories. You get Abraham, who's very wealthy. Job starts off being very rich and loses everything. King Solomon. And you get a guy called Nabal, who is the prototype of the rich fool, which we'll come back to. And Jesus tells a story about a rich fool when he's in Galilee later on. So there are many characters along the way, and there are many poor people and many rich people in the Bible. But in Killing Spree, I just wanted to, tell a little parable about the power of money and what it does to us. When Jesus tells his story about the rich fool, he is referencing an account that happened with David, who went on to be king of Israel, and he reigned over the glory days of Israel. But before he was ever king, he was a renegade. He was a rebel on the run in the wilderness. Must have thought that maybe he would live out his days like that, really, and he gathered around him a gang of fairly questionable characters. And on one occasion he came across this character called Nabal. Nabal is interesting because his name means fool. But Nabal himself was a shepherd, like David was a shepherd. And he's a sort of cracked, distorted mirror image of David, really. Because Nabal's very rich, and David isn't at that point. Nabal's married to Abigail, who is a beautiful woman, very wise, very clever woman, actually. And David's on the run and has had to leave his wife, Michal, behind. David and his men, of course, being always on the run, are always foraging for food and ways to survive. So David sends a couple of his men along to Nabal to sort of say, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we're in the area, and you've got a lot of sheep, and you wouldn't want anything bad to happen to those sheep, would you? And all we want is just a bit of food, really, and a bit of help to get by. And Nabal takes one look and says, get lost, I'm not helping you lot out. And David then threatens to kill him. In fact, starts to get his men together so that they will go over there and destroy Nabal and steal some of his goods. And that's where Abigail intervenes. She realises what's going on, and she sees the folly of it for both men, and quickly saddles up, takes loads of food and gifts, and goes and finds David and says to him, you'll always regret it if you murder my husband. You don't really want to do that. And here is some food. And by the way, if you ever become king, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, don't forget about me. Well, what happens to Nabal is that subsequently, very quickly, he dies. He is partying, enjoying himself, indulging himself, but not really doing anything to help other people, and suddenly has a stroke and drops dead. And David marries Abigail. And so it's all a kind of interwoven, tangled story, really. But Jesus then, years and years, decades, centuries later, he tells a story about a similar rich fool who won't share what he's got. And the result for that rich fool is that it's as if God says to him, you're a waste of space. You've got all this stuff, and all you're doing is storing it up. You're not using it, you're not sharing it with anyone, you're not helping anybody with it. So what's the point of your life? So I think we'll call an end to that, and we'll draw the curtain. And the rich fool, like Nabal, dies. So these stories fed into Killing Spree. You may or may not spot them, but if you get a chance to have a read of it, that's on my website, davehopwood.com. Thanks very much for listening, and that was Dave's podcast.